Recording started. Okay. Maybe we have about 30 seconds here till 1. You can see Brooke now.
You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. It is 1 p.m. on September 8th, 2025. This is a meeting of the Land Use Review Board. I am Janet Hurley, the chair, and I will ask each board member to introduce themselves as I see them on my screen here. Sarah.
Sarah Had, board member present.
Thank you for doing the text, Sarah. Kirsten.
Kirsten Sultan, board member present.
Brooke.
Brooke Dingledine, good afternoon.
Oh, it just changed the order. Alex.
Alex Weinhagen, board member. Hello, everyone.
Okay, that's all 5 of us here and present. Do any board members have any updates to the agenda? Let's see, shaking heads. Or no shaking at all. Okay. Do we have any public comment on non-agenda items at this time, Thomas?
I do. Thank you for asking.
Okay, go right
I'm
ahead.
Thomas Weiss from Montpelier. My comment has to do with meeting logistics. I have observed that commenting takes more time for those calling on the telephone to actually figure out what to do to get acknowledged. Like at this time now, when you ask for comments, they need to remember to press the *5 to raise in order to raise the hand, and then *6 to speak. And by then, the meeting has often moved on because they didn't figure out all the logistics fast enough because they're just not used to them. And the caller then gets frustrated and is less likely to participate in the future because of the frustration of not having been able to make the comment in a timely fashion. So my suggestion is to allow those participants full control of their microphones so that they turn them on and off with the *6 command, and that the central control, because I noticed that many of your microphones are off, and that can be done centrally, I guess, as well as locally. So that let them have full control of their microphones. And if their, screen on the big screen starts, having the little flicker around the outside, that indicates their sound is coming through inadvertently, just a gentle reminder to them to turn off their microphones using *6. And then hopefully it will be a little faster, a little easier for them to get online, not get online, but to let you know that they do want to make some comments.
Okay, thank you.
We only
Sarah?
have, I think,
Thank you.
Sorry.
and
I
Sorry,
believe
Thomas.
that everybody does have full control of their microphones right now.
right, but I've noticed that in the past, I think we've only had one caller on the telephone several times, and I've noticed that that caller has been shut off here because their microphone was on and they weren't realizing that you were picking up whatever little sounds in the background there were.
All right, well, just to clarify for today's meeting, everybody has full control of their microphones. And I believe that's the premise that we've been operating from, so.
Yeah, I think there was a point where I turned off the caller's microphone because there was some audio interference from it. But I think
Right.
it was after we had already worked with her to get her give her the ability to interact with us. So, but we will strive to, make it easy for all to communicate with us, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Consent agenda. review and approve the August 25th meeting minutes. Those were, that was a meeting that just Sarah, Brooke, and I participated in. Brooke?
I would move to finalize and approve the minutes as drafted, unless there are others that have corrections.
Okay, Sarah?
I'll second.
Okay, I have no corrections. They seemed good to me. So I think unless there are any comments from the outer reaches here, I'm ready for a vote. Any comments from anybody else on the minutes from the August 25th meeting? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Sarah, did you vote?
Yes, I voted aye.
Okay, thank you. That is 3 ayes, probably 2 abstentions.
Yeah,
Okay,
Correct.
okay.
abstaining, I
Alex
was
and-
not in attendance.
And Alex, same. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Operations, budget, and legislative updates. We've been discussing in the last week and a half or so the return to office plan that the administration has put forth. We are in the midst of reaching out to all of our staff to get as much input as possible. I'm feeling a little bit of urgency to develop a plan for the Land Use Review Board and the Act 250 program that works for our program and that meets public accessibility and collaborative goals. And so I'm going to be attending the tech meeting tomorrow in Rachel's absence. I've asked Pete to get as much information as he can from his team. I need yet to talk to Jenny about getting information from the legal team so that the board can get some forward motion on developing a plan that works for our program. And I welcome any discussion right now if any board members have any comments on this. Kirsten.
Yeah, so I saw the memo last Friday, was it, from the Secretary of Administration highlighting 3 factors that are to be prioritized in the preliminary administration's planning discussions, and those seemed great, items to be focusing on. And so maybe some of our staff will be able to also provide information that's relevant to those factors. People who have long commutes, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, fortunately, we don't have anybody out of state, so we don't have to worry about that one.
right.
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 So, Brooke.
Yeah, I think that a comprehensive presentation that takes into account what is important in administering this particular program, which is statewide. And there may be other avenues for collaboration because we are spread out at so many different locations with a fairly thin staff. And so I think that if we presented to the governor's office a comprehensive plan that demonstrates how we are going to serve Vermonters, be available at our district offices so that they can rely on in-person assistance, but to demonstrate that 3 days a week may not be the most effective or may not serve the interests of the Act 250 program. So I think that we need to take some time, but I agree with you in terms of this is time critical, that we figure out how best to organize our workforce.
Thank you, Brooke. So, oh, go ahead, Alex.
So I think we're all on the same page about trying to make sure that this this decision by the administration gets implemented for our program in a way that works. However, I think in the last couple of weeks and including today during this meeting, the governor and the administration have been pretty clear about what direction, where this is going. I don't think we should delude ourselves into thinking that our little agency is going to get some sort of pass on the basics of this policy. So I think we need to figure out how to work with it, even while we're, making known what our program needs are. And the sooner we figure that out, the better for everybody in our organization to understand, what they need to do in terms of shifting their home work lives and balance and that sort of thing.
Sarah.
I think the thing that I'll note that hasn't been noted yet is that we're reliant upon other agencies for a lot of our spaces and access to those spaces, as well as how many people we can fit into those spaces. So I hear what Alex is saying, I hear what the other board members are saying, and I think it just comes down to a pragmatic of what we can make fit. And so I agree that we should be moving forward on this. I think it's a challenge because our other agencies that we utilize space from are also moving forward with this. So I think what I've heard from my bit in the office over the past 2 weeks is uncertainty with our staff, and I think the better sooner that we can provide some certainty and a plan, hopefully, the more stability and reassurance that will give our organization.
Okay. Thank you. Brooke.
Yeah, and let me just add, I mean, some of the factors that have given rise to this plan are problematic from our standpoint. I think it was mentioned that there were no space issues anticipated, but we have that as well as the budgetary effect of it. While I totally respect the governor's order, I think it makes all the sense in the world because our duty is to administer the Act 250 program. We are under a lot of deadlines, and we're also trying to figure out how to speed up a housing crisis through the appeals process. And if we present something to the governor that says we can do it better this way, and try to stay as much as we can within the confines, I think that may be the best approach, not assuming that we're going to get any kind of pass. But it's incumbent upon us to speak up and say this may not work the way that the administration is anticipating it with regard to our program. And I think we have the duty to speak up about that. And if exceptions are not going to be tolerated, then we'll have to deal with it.
Yep. Thank you. Kirsten.
So, there had previously been mention of connecting with other boards, to see what their response is and see if it makes sense to, maybe work on the topic alongside them. I'm just wondering, where that stands and, we don't have to get into that level of detail here now, but just kind of a mention.
We heard back from Green Mountain Care Board, Cannabis Control Board. I should have reviewed those emails before this meeting, but it'll be part of our discussions when we collate all the information from our staff and start devising a plan for ourselves. Jenny, did we also hear from the PUC? I can't remember.
Yes, we did. They don't currently have any plans, but recommended that the director or the chairs speak to each other.
And just as we've been meeting, the governor sent a video and text message to all state employees. We may want to look at that as well before continuing our work on this. So we get back to the agenda. Sorry. Okay. Are there any other comments on this return to office topic before moving on from anybody? Okay. Budget, as nothing's changed since last week when Rachel returns, she'll be coming to the board with a proposed budget, and we will take that up when she is back after next week. No legislative updates right now. I didn't get another follow-up on the request from Senator Clarkston to have a meeting regarding our request to extend the deadlines for the Tier 2 report and for the Tier 3 final rule to LCAR deadline. I will follow up on that this week. So I'll keep you apprised of that. Do you have anything, Pete?
No, I'll just say I did receive a few more legislative changes requests, so I'll continue to compile those and we'll get that on your agenda for more discussion down the road. But please do send those to me when you've got them.
I still have a list for you.
Excellent.
So I just haven't typed it up. Okay. Let's move on to studies and reports. First, we have some amendments to the Regional Planning Commission application guidelines ahead of our anticipated first application next week. So let's see. I have to open. So Rebecca and I just worked on some revisions this morning. I want to make sure I get the right one here. Let's see. There it is. Okay. And I'm going to share screen in a moment when it pops up. Oh, Rebecca, maybe you should share screen because you already have it open. It's telling me.
Yep, I can do that. One
Okay.
second. Okay, can everyone see it?
Yes.
Okay, let me just go to the beginning.
Yeah. And I'll just say, as Rebecca's scrolling, that the changes were to add some details about digital map submissions, to require Tier 1B map submissions digitally, along with the FLU map submissions digitally. We had previously, the guidelines were written to suggest that the Tier 1B map was optional if the Tier 1B boundaries corresponded exactly with the FLU boundaries. But as we thought more about this, it became evident that it would be much better for our review process if we had a separate Tier 1B data set to review in a map viewer. So, and we ran that by the RPCs and they were good with that. And then the other change has to do with what we had anticipated would be a plan review committee. And just in terms of implementing this in the most efficient and functional way, we have changed that to be a designated board member who will coordinate the review process from the pre-application through final determination phases. So as Rebecca scrolls through here, you'll see these changes. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Everything's in track changes, so I'm just gonna hit next to bring us. So we're in, so 1006 in the submission section.
So here is the Tier 1B requests. Now the Tier 1B map data must be shared, not just optionally shared if the Tier 1B boundary does not go to the full extent of the FLU boundary. And then all throughout here, wherever there was submission of draft map, I just added for clarity that it must be submitted in a digital format that meets that previous section that Rebecca just scrolled through, that meets the requirements of that section. So the Tier 1B draft map and the FLU draft map in the pre-application phase. So here you'll start seeing that we have eliminated or replaced the plan review committee with designated board member or board in the case of dismissal decisions. Brooke. I'm sorry, Brooke, you're muted.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think you just need to insert a before board member, a board member to coordinate. We'll designate, you lost the A.
Yes, got it. Got it. Thank you. Thank you for
Carry
your
on?
eagle eye. Yes, carry on. The designated board member. The designated board member. The designated board member in their discretion may allow a 10-day extension on comments. Okay, and then in this case, the plan review committee, we have changed the wording to the pre-application review may include. The public meeting will be limited to a reasonable length of time depending on the complexity of the issues. Do we want may be there, Rebecca?
Yep,
Or
we can do
will?
that.
It was May. Okay.
Going.
The pre-application review will focus on.
Janet, I'm just gonna speak up before I
Oh,
get too
sorry,
much
I didn't
further.
see your hand. Yeah, go
All
ahead.
right, it's Sarah. The pre-application committee, our plan review committee, now I know we've changed the name of it to designated board, but is that still going to be two board board members, not just one?
No, I think what Rebecca's read of the open meeting law is that it's the board's responsibility to conduct the pre-application review. I think that it makes sense for a designated board member to coordinate that review. And I think it also makes sense for that board member to reach out to staff who may be interested in helping with that review, with, putting in their 2 cents. And I think that what we can expect is that even in the pre-application review, that this will help the remaining board members, direct them to particular issues that may need their attention. And then, we had anticipated that maybe the board, if we had a plan review committee, maybe the full board wouldn't have to read the pre-application in its entirety. Maybe that's not really the case because statute requires the board to conduct this pre-application review. So that's part of why this has changed. And so, functionally, it was also difficult to imagine how we would coordinate that review if we named a committee that included multiple board members, because it would keep triggering the open meeting law. And, we have to do this in as efficient a manner as we can. And I think that, we will be holding that public meeting in coordination with the applicant RPC. So it's not that this won't be a public process, but to have to convene open meetings every time the committee would have gotten together, I think would have been cumbersome.
Okay, so this is a substantial, this is a different direction than where we were going in before. We're having a pre-application review committee of 2 board members and staff. This is now putting it back more on the board.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Just because of the statutory expectation that the board will conduct this review, and because of the, the cumbersome nature of triggering open meeting every time a committee, convened. So, Brooke.
Yeah, I know we discussed the sub area, and I think it's a great idea. Have we checked with legal just to make sure that we can do that under the statute?
To do what? Sorry, Brooke.
That we can define or allow the municipality to show good cause why it should be a smaller area? Is that something we should double check to make sure we have the jurisdiction to do less than the full area? I'm just curious.
I think we vetted that, yes, earlier.
Okay.
And
Just,
yes.
I just don't want to run
So-
into a challenge on it. So if we're good on
Yeah.
that, that's great.
I mean, we might run into a challenge on it anyway. We'll see, but is that Sarah or Thomas with the hand up?
It's Sarah.
Okay, go ahead.
I think the one final thing that I know is I think there are perhaps 2 ways to go about dealing with the plan review committee. And the first way would be to have a plan review committee and have it trigger the open meeting law and have that couple of board members be delegated as opposed to the full board. The other way is to go with the full board. I think you've laid out the reasons why you're recommending that we go with the full board. But I think there are 2 paths here that we still could have a pre-application committee delegated by the board and trigger open meeting law. It's just, I understand the reasons why you went with this direction. However, it's one that I think is going to be more cumbersome
In the end.
for the board, just in terms of everything else that we have coming at us. Yeah, sorry, it took me a little bit off guard.
I think that this designated board member can work with staff and can help the rest of the board know where to focus attention in terms of parts of the regional plan that require more attention, instead of especially in this pre-application phase where we had been anticipating that maybe not every board member needed to read the pre-application. But I think, you know, we'll see how this works. This is, none of it's written in stone at this point, and we're about to jump in next week. So I think I can volunteer myself as the first designated board member, and I think that Sarah and Kirsten will hopefully be available for the next two. I know that Brooke and Alex are pretty tied up with other duties, at least for these first few applications. So go ahead, Rebecca. So the designated board member will prepare a recommended response for the board. It will be reviewed at a board meeting. I guess we need to change "and" to "a." For a vote, the recommended response is advisory only, and the board may not adopt it. After the vote, the board will issue an adopted pre-application response. The adopted pre-application response will be sent to the applicant. The board's adopted pre-application is advisory only and does not guarantee an affirmative determination when the adopted plan or Tier 1B status request is submitted. So, Brooke.
That last sentence in the first paragraph, the recommended response is advisory only. I would suggest changing the remaining part of the sentence. It sounds a little strange. I get what the meaning
Okay.
is, that they
Maybe
may
just-
or may not, or they're not
Yeah.
obligated to adopt it, but it sounds a little odd.
Do you want to
Right.
say, and the board is not obligated to adopt it?
That's fine, or
Or do you want to just leave it at the recommended response is advisory only?
yeah, I think that's probably sufficient.
Okay,
I'm not sure that we
That's-
need to say may or may not, or it's not obligated.
okay. Yeah,
Great. Thanks.
let's leave it there. Thanks. Okay, Rebecca, continue. Here we go into the adopted, and these are the map changes that we made, exactly the same as previous.
Sorry, I have a question
Sections.
about the item
Oh.
that we were,
That Brooke just spoke on?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's
If you-
okay.
If Rebecca
Go
can
ahead.
scroll back up for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely.
The
Here
word
we go.
response is deleted. I'm thinking that word is needed in the sentence.
Yep, you're right. In that last sentence there.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
board's adopted pre-application response is advisory only.
Yep, okay.
Okay.
Reject that
Thank
deletion.
you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your
Good
eagle eye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Kirsten.
Okay, ready to go on?
Yes.
All right, just, okay.
Okay, so application review. The board will designate a board member to coordinate the application review process and issue a recommended decision. So same as pre-application. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Let me just.
And instead of plan review committee, the designated board member.
Just want to make you guys, so you can see it. Okay. Okay. So now we
Okay,
must be in
map
the redetermination section? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And here we'd already designated a board member for this one, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and then we just have the chart.
So any more discussion on these proposed revisions?
Nope.
Sarah?
I guess I don't feel comfortable with modification made with the plan review committee. That's a pretty substantial change and I would like some more time to digest it and think it through. I don't feel comfortable voting on it today.
Is our next meeting Monday?
Yes. The 15th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 2 days before we get our first application. What are your reservations, Sarah?
I'd like to hear from other board members, but I believe that the plan review committee was a collaborative approach to try and get through some of these first ones. I think, vesting any one of us particularly, as we start to get these plans underneath us, can make it, not as robust of a response and thoughtful process. I know just placing myself into a plan reviewer category, I feel comfortable with that. I feel like I have the skill set in the background, the preparation, but I don't think that is as much of a service to our applicants and to the board as having a committee of at least 2 board members as well as staff. I think that that was something that I was looking forward to, as thinking that it was going to be a very good collaborative way of having a robust process, and placing that all into one person, I don't think will achieve that.
I think the plan review committee is the board. And the board will be holding a meeting, a public meeting, and working collaboratively on this. It's just that in addition to regular board meetings and that public meeting, we won't be having to convene open meetings of a separate committee. I think that having the designated board member work with staff and board members offline to coordinate this review is, I don't know. I guess thinking about sort of this separate plan review committee triggering open meeting law in addition to our regular board meetings and the public meeting that we intend to hold in the region, I think it just seems unwieldy. Kirsten.
So a couple things. My understanding of open meeting law is that one can receive and collate information and comments from, let's say in this case, individual board members and staff. It's the discussion. You're not allowed to get into any back and forth discussion of the topic. That all has to happen in open meeting, has been ongoing. So I would be understanding that could still occur under this revised model. And then the question I had about triggering open meeting law with the subcommittee, would that follow the same like parameters that we've been implementing now with the board meetings? Like you set an agenda, warn it, draft minutes, approve the minutes, etc. It's just that instead of 5 board members, you'd have 2.
Yeah.
So it would be the rigor of all those same steps and record it.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I think what we could do instead is we could maybe put time on each of our regular meetings to discuss the application that is before us, and sometimes it might be multiple applications. So, but within the context of our regular board meetings. Because we will be having regular board meetings throughout this 60-day pre-application and then the 45-day other. Sarah?
So with everything else that we have coming at us as a board, to set time aside on full board meetings for discussions within the statutory framework of the 60 days that we have to provide comment. You know, I think that's something that, again, we could choose an option to go with, and choosing the option to not put the additional resources into the plan review because it might trigger open meeting law and what have you. And instead go into this direction where it's not going to need to be discussed at our full board meetings. And the extra time that we're going to need on those board meetings and rigor, I think either way, we're going to have to commit more resources, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it could be,
I
but
could see us meeting more frequently, needing to meet like 2 or 3 times a week to get through the answer coming in.
how about if we try it this way the first time around, Sarah, and see how it goes? What do you think? I think it may be more, I think it presents less less of that sort of extra work because first of all, because the interpretation of open meeting law is that the board must conduct the pre-application response, not a subcommittee of the board. And I think, you know, we always have time on our agendas for regular reporting and whatnot. I don't think this will necessarily move other things off the agenda. I don't know. I guess I'm asking if you're willing to give it a try to see how it goes. And if you feel that it doesn't offer enough collaborative work between board members to consider changing it. Brooke?
I do agree with Sarah on the notion that I think the board can delegate their authority, and either Jenny or Rebecca can chime in if they think differently. So I am in agreement with her on that. I also do see the benefit of proceeding like this and trying it out. I mean, it seems no different really than our silo work on our different tasks for Act 181. And I personally think that I would benefit from it being shepherded by one of the planners, at least the first time or two, so that, I mean, not that I don't have experience with regional plans, but not in this kind of review scenario. So that to me would be very beneficial to have somebody in charge of each plan to kind of tee it up and bring our attention to particular issues or items. And we can always change it if this doesn't provide the kind of robust review that Sarah's talking about, because I do appreciate her point on that as well.
Yeah. Alex, do you have thoughts?
In between. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I agree with Sarah that this caught me off guard a little bit. I wasn't expecting the wholesale removal of the plan review committee, and but I understand your points, Janet. So I don't have a strong opinion either way. I do think, as Brooke said, that, it is the board that is going to provide the pre-application comments, regardless of who we might be delegating, drafting those comments to. So I don't think we're running afoul of statute by having either one designated board member or a plan
Or
review
two.
committee of
Yeah.
2 plus staff. Either way, I think ultimately it's the board that provides those inputs. So I don't think that's the issue. So yeah, sorry, not a strong opinion either way.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten, do you have any more thoughts?
No, I mean, I agree with Brooke and Alex, and I don't have a strong opinion. I'm comfortable trying it out this way as long as we kind of maybe keep a placeholder on, let's see how it works. And like Brooke, I feel that I would benefit from, for the first 1 or 2 anyhow, like just having that more substantive direct engagement on it. Maybe as a full board, that could be helpful to all get our bearings together that
Yeah.
way. So maybe, maybe it does make sense to do this at least on a trial basis.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, any more thoughts?
I'm sorry, I'm just still not feeling comfortable.
Okay.
I just, in all fairness, when I was in a earlier meeting with you this morning, we were still using the term plan review committee. And so this is a relatively major change in short order. So hopefully my discomfort is understandable.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought you had had conversations with Rebecca and that you had brought it up already with, you brought it to my attention, so I talked with Rebecca after that. So I'm sorry, I thought that meant that you had these conversations with Rebecca. And that maybe didn't get you off guard, but I'm sorry about that. I mean, I sort of felt like, when you brought it up, gosh, okay. So I kind of felt caught off guard too this morning, but in talking with Rebecca, I think I became comfortable with it and it makes some amount of sense to me, at least to try it this way. There could be benefit, as Kirsten just said, in terms of having the full board be a part of more a part of this pre-application review than first anticipated. Just to sort of make sure everybody feels comfortable with this new process that we're undergoing, and maybe having a committee will make sense at a further point. Sarah.
I'll just say that when I was talking with Rebecca about this, because we were envisioning with Tier 1A review committee as well.
Yeah.
The last I spoke with her on this was, instead of using the term committee, using the term reviewers, which is the term that I used earlier today. So it wasn't completely changing that process, and it was just changing a name. So this sort of struck me by surprise that we're doing something more than changing a name. I understand this was something that I think both you and she needed to get through a little bit more. But it's definitely a different direction.
Maybe I can propose that we discuss this in executive session a little bit today, before voting on adopting these changes, to get counsel on it from a legal perspective. Does that make sense to people?
I'm fine with that. And
Okay,
like you said, I think we have until, we can take as long as
Monday.
we want, but we have until Monday before we
Yeah.
expect to see a regional plan. So we can always take final action on this proposed change then.
yeah, okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, great. So let's move on. We are going to deal with appeals in Tier 3 separately. So Sarah, do you have Tier 1A guideline updates today.
It sounds like I need to work with Rebecca a little more again on some of the different aspects of it. So
Okay.
progress, yes, but thank you.
Okay. And what about you and Kirsten on your various collaborative work for Tier 2, road construction jurisdictional guidelines? I feel like I'm missing something, but how about Kirsten? Do you have anything?
Nothing new to report. A meeting that was scheduled for Friday got pushed to this week because of availability of legal on
Okay.
working on deadline. And Sarah and I have another meeting, and we've organized coordinating some staff input as well. So things are sort of in the works, but nothing really new to report. Unless Sarah, feel free to jump in.
No,
And
I think we did have a nice, quick conversation with Pete last week about the coordinators meeting.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, hopefully we'll make more progress on the road rule this week.
Great,
Yep.
thanks. Any update on wood product manufacturers implementation, Kirsten?
No,
Okay.
nothing further to the work that occurred last week. And we've talked about the legislative piece,
Okay, great.
getting
Yeah.
that in front of the board. So,
Okay, so let's move on. Well, let's ask if there's any comment from anyone else on anything we have been discussing under this agenda item. So studies and reports, mostly guidelines for regional plan applications. Okay, so Alex.
Yeah, so just an additional update because we're going to be talking very much specifics under the tier 3 agenda item. But as far as a tier 3 update, the Rural Caucus, Laura Sibilia, and others reached out to me. They've been in communication over quite some time as tier 3 has been kicked around. Anyways, they reached out and said, hey, you offered to come and talk to us and give us an update. We'd love to have that happen soon. And so I've scheduled a October 7th time horizon to meet with them virtually and give them an update. And the timing of it works nicely because hopefully we will have the second draft of the tier 3 rule by then, and we will be queuing up for public engagement sessions, or at least I will be, in late October. So meeting with the Rural Caucus legislative members on October 7th should be a nice preview for them. And deviously from our interest, they will be able to help publicize the public engagement sessions for later in the month and get their constituents to them. So hopefully it'll be helpful in that regard. And then, as Kirsten said, one of her many collaborative efforts is with me on Criterion 8C rulemaking, which hasn't kicked off yet, but will. And the schedule for that's up on the websites. We did make a minor change to the kickoff meeting to make sure some key stakeholders could be there. And we brought the meeting a little earlier. And yeah, we have a meeting on tap for later this week with Rebecca to start talking about the legal end of that and brainstorming how to prepare the stakeholders for the first working group meeting later this month.
Great, thanks. I was going to ask you about 8C. But what you just said about tier 3 and the Rural Caucus reminded me that that Nicole Kesslering, who is an engineer in Rutland County, reached out to me recently and looking for guidance around how they can help their clients understand the tier 1 A and B exemptions and any changes in process that Act 181, the Act 181 changes that we're implementing. She asked if I would be willing to do a presentation for the civil and environmental engineering community. They have a meeting in Burlington, November 13th. I said, sure. I wonder if that's something Kirsten might want to be a part of. So
Yeah,
I
I'd
don't
be
know if
happy
we're
to.
not spreading you too thin, Kirsten.
Yeah, I'd be
Um,
happy to.
Okay, so I'll follow up with her on that. And yeah, that just Alex's Rural Caucus report reminded me of that.
Can I ask- oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
so Alex, is Rural Caucus really just interested in tier 3? Or are they also interested in learning about the road rule, criterion 8C? Like, it's
Tier
really
1.
tier 3?
You read my mind, and that was my initial response or phone conversation with Representative Sibilia, was to ask that question. And it's primarily tier 3, but they would like an update on the rest. And so I said, I'm happy to provide the briefest of updates on the rest as the intro to the conversation. And she and I both agreed that they may be interested in a more substantive conversation about some of the other Act 181 elements, and that would be more appropriate at another meeting. So
Okay.
I think she's going to reach out to the caucus and ask them if they're interested in having that more substantive discussion of other items at another meeting. Get back to us.
Okay, thanks.
It might make sense, Alex, to point to the presentations that we'll be doing in October, the ones that aren't tier 3. So Sarah and I are gonna be partnering on tier 1 A and B work, and might be helpful to let her know that we're doing that.
You mean Municipal Day?
There's that's one, and the other one is P and Z Day, or
Oh, right.
Planning
Yeah.
and Zoning Day. So
Yeah.
and the dates are maybe October 17th and 23rd. Can't remember. Do you remember, Sarah, off the top of your head, what those dates are?
17th is absolutely, it's the VLCT Planning and Zoning Forum.
Okay.
And hang on, I can tell you exactly when that is. Yeah. Oh. Yep, it is the 22nd
Okay.
of October.
Close, but no cigar. 22nd. Thanks. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to appeals study discussion. 3 minutes early. Wait, Kirsten.
Oh, for what it's worth, I was just going to mention that Alex and I and Pete and Jenny and Aaron Brondike met this morning. And had a long planning meeting looking ahead towards our annual meeting, which is October 30th. Yeah, fall's going to be busy.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks for that quick update. All right. If there's nothing more on those general reports, we'll move on to appeals. Take it away, Brooke.
Thank you. Hopefully we can move through this quickly because I know we have tier 3 following this conversation. So I'm going to share my screen to put up the chart that we were looking at last time. And as we discussed, we have supplemental record review instead of de novo. For our district commission decisions, we have on the record for JOs because it's tied to the facts. Now, I made some changes to the chart on the municipal zoning decisions for housing, or this is the one thing that we were discussing the last time. Are we confining our decisions on tier 1A to housing? Or are we taking all of tier 1 and then 1B housing? That was sort of being bantered back and forth.
Yeah, and I think we hadn't settled on anything yet. My thought was that if we're going to take them, that we take them all. And tier 1B is only housing tier 1A is anything.
Okay.
Other board members, Kirsten?
My thought would be to focus it on housing only. Just because I think that's aligned with other housing goals that have been, part of this Act 181 work. And I think there's sort of a rationale for looking at the housing piece, but that would just be where if I was gonna decide
Mhm.
to do 1A and 1B housing.
Sarah?
I don't think we should be splitting tier 1A up. I think what you have within tier 1A areas are going to be high density areas where the housing could also be part of a mixed use project. And to have an exclusionary thought on mixed use projects, I don't think that we should do that. I think it would be more beneficial, perhaps offer some more incentives for tier 1A. I think housing is a component of Act 181, but I think also expediting the appeals process and offering development incentives within these designated areas is also part of the intended output. So I think that we should be including all of tier 1A as well as tier 1B.
Yeah, I think that the incentive, that part of the idea of tier 1A is to incentivize development in these centers, and that goes beyond just incentivizing housing. Alex, do you have thoughts?
Sorry to say this twice in the same meeting, but I don't have a strong opinion on this tier 1A everything or just housing, except to say that this is the appeal study, and the appeal study, was focused on housing. So I understand Kirsten's point and feel like it's relevant, but again, I don't really have a strong opinion. And let's
Okay.
be clear, there aren't going to be that many tier 1A communities, especially not in the first 2 years of this. So we may be debating something that's sort of small potatoes.
Yeah. And Brooke, you're coordinating this for us, but you're allowed to give your opinion too. What do you think?
Well, I think for the mixed use projects, we can define, any project that involves any housing whatsoever. If we wanted to make sure that we did not leave out those kinds of projects. I do think that housing is the focus here. I just don't have a good sense of volume and the research that I had intended to do this weekend, I was not able to do. I was going to try to look and see if we could, somehow gauge how many applications or appeals that we might be getting out of tier 1A towns. We can still try to do that. I just did not have an opportunity over the past few days. In terms of the overall picture, I think that certainly, well, let me just raise a different issue, and that is in the process of this appeals study as well as elsewhere, I have heard the objection that some municipalities are reluctant to go forward with tier 1A status because they do not want to have to shoulder the Act 250 enforcement piece. And I have thought long and hard about the logistics of turning over Act 250 enforcement. And my concerns are this. When you have a permit that's been amended a number of times, you might be at a -23 permit, literally. And for a district coordinator even to go back and figure out what the operative conditions are, all the way back to the original undashed permit, is a very significant task. And I don't know whether we do a memo, a closing memo, and send it to the zoning administrator to say, these are the operative dash permits that you have to look at, or here are the conditions. I don't know. I think that that would be a huge waste of resources to try to create that. And I am concerned about leaving that obligation on the town. Now, having said that, A&R and Act 250 retain jurisdiction for enforcement if the town does not operate in or doesn't enforce in a reasonable time period, which Jenny and I have discussed. What is the reasonable time period? What does that mean? How and when would we act? I honestly think it's an issue, and notwithstanding, I've talked with Alex about this, and he has lots of other ideas. What I am suggesting is not let's change one Act 181. This is something that has cropped up that I think we should speak to the legislature about, to say perhaps that we should retain that jurisdiction and not discourage municipalities who want to take on 1A, but for the fact that they don't want to have to shoulder enforcement. That is where I think our resources would be better utilized as the Act 250 program, as opposed to opening up 1A beyond housing. It's just a thought. I again don't have very strong opinions about it, but they are issues to consider in the overall context of what kind of control or are we giving up or taking on for 1A.
Okay, thank you. Brooke, do you feel like you got a feel of where to go with this? Wait, Sarah's got her hand up.
Rather have a vote or a straw poll or something.
Yeah, Sarah?
I'm all in, and I think that to Brooke's point, if it sort of validates, I don't think you're gonna have that many tier 1As to start. I think you should let the few that are brave enough to step up to the plate and to take it on, to have a valid, streamlined process to be able to take advantage of. So I think that's even more reason perhaps to allow them in, is because of all the reasons that Brooke stated. I think trying to incentivize tier 1A more is needed.
Yeah.
So Sarah, are you saying all of tier 1, but do you have a position about the enforcement piece in 1A?
So that's apples and oranges, and that's I think another conversation completely. I think that would have to be a legislative change to Act 1A1. And so that's something that we could talk about perhaps when Pete has the list of fixes. And I'm a little bit closer in terms of guidelines, but I'm not sure that that's part of this conversation.
That's helpful, thanks. Yeah, I assumed we would be perhaps putting it on the list of not the language changes that are just mistakes, but suggestions about improvement I mean, it's not a huge thing, but it does matter apparently.
Yeah. And
Okay,
Brooke, I'm in the same boat with Sarah, but I'm not wedded to it if the full board wants to go the other way, but.
And yeah, Kirsten.
Well, I was just gonna say, I'm not wedded to, I really just need to limit it to housing. I can also appreciate the simplicity of, all tier 1A and 1B housing or 1B mixed use with housing. Here, here's the path. It's more straightforward to administer, I suppose.
Yeah, and
Could
1B, Frank, just for clarity for people, 1B does exempt housing only. It doesn't exempt things that aren't housing. And I would think that whatever the definition there is in statute already is what we could use if we were to go with only housing in tier 1A. But I don't know where we are. We're sort of like right on the fence there, Brooke.
I think
So-
Brooke, the report could recognize that there are two options and both of them are positive. We're not going to make this decision, whatever we recommend, the legislature will be. So if we give them a couple of options, then that's fine with me anyways. Doesn't have to be super definitive on every single point.
Perfect. No, that's good. I think I'm good.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Now, the other issue, and I mentioned, we're going to be meeting with the secretary and Billy Coster later this week to talk about A&R, whether or not, they've been very clear that they would like to stay with the court for their appeals and are not interested in taking on an internal appeal format to the secretary. But what I do want to ask them is, for the very small number, in order to preserve the consolidation option, would they be amenable to bringing it over? One of the arguments for that is that we're trying to stay as close to the environmental court rules as we can so that there is not a divergence of process necessarily. Maybe just, it's a little bit different evidentiary standards, that kind of thing. So that's going to be a bookmark right now, and after we talk with A&R, we can discuss that further. Now, just a couple things that I wanted to talk to you about the appeal to the, first, the scope of the record that will be reviewed by the LURB is going to be limited to the administrative record, but it's going to allow supplemental evidence for a liberally applied just cause standard. So all recorded materials have to come up to the board. Audio recordings for a hearing will be considered sufficient for our purposes. Transcripts can be ordered if they're desired, but paid for by parties. And if they can't find somebody to transcribe it, I don't know what to do about that. That was a concern that was voiced during the appeals process, but you have a recording of it. Now, the record also can be supplemented, but what we're trying to do is eliminate the first hearing. That information's already in, it's been cross-examined, it gets given to us. And then it's the additional information that we would actually have a hearing on, the supplemental information. Now, just to remind everybody, the scope of issues is limited to the issues that the appellant got standing on below and then has the opportunity to actually appeal. So they can't go outside the scope of their own standing for their appeal. And then lastly, the Supreme Court appellate review that would go from the LURB to then court. It would go directly to the Supreme Court. Questions of fact have to be clearly erroneous, and questions of law are deferential, if not unreasonable, arbitrary, or capricious, or discriminatory. This is the PUC standard on appeal to the Supreme Court, where it goes directly. It does not go to the trial courts. Any questions on that? Kirsten?
So, I think I know what you mean by in the first bullet of the first paragraph that's shown on the screen. It says all recorded materials considered by the local board, commission, coordinator, or A&R. I'm just stuck a little bit on the term all recorded materials. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure 100% exactly how that would be interpreted in a situation where it was in question. And I wonder if it might instead just say the record.
Actually,
the record considered by whatever body.
So I stole for these bullet points, the stakeholders suggested provisions. I think these are David Mears. It could be John Groveman. I can't keep them straight anymore in terms of the content. And the APA specifies what the record is. So this is a general description of it. It is clear. It is all of the pleadings, motions, if there are any, all the evidentiary. So, in an Act 250 setting, we would have the entire Act 250 database plus the hearing recording, video, audio. So, the board rules that I'm working on have all of that very clearly spelled out. So all I was trying to get at is whatever kind of appeal. If we were talking about A&R, it would be the materials from A&R. So, but
Okay, thanks.
if we end up doing those folks.
Sarah or Thomas, maybe?
Thomas.
Hi, I had a thought on the supplemental record review. And my thought is, what about considering whether supplemental information should be allowed only when requested by the board? And that would be covering areas where the record might be missing or incomplete or contradictory, rather than allowing the parties to submit supplemental information that they thought would be relevant. And I haven't thought this one through anymore, but I'm suggesting it as a potential discussion topic.
Let me address that by saying this. I take a step back and I look at the proceeding. This is a proceeding for an individual to go and get a permit to allow them to do something from a governmental entity. They provide the information. They have a burden of persuasion and a burden of proof for production and a burden of persuasion on certain, for example, of the Act 250 criteria. Honestly, I don't think it's for the court or the board to say, oh, we want more information about this, that, or the other thing. To me, I understand the wording of, gee, if the board thinks there's something important they want to know about. For example, I've seen the PUC reach out to the Regional Planning Commission and say, we don't understand your position about this project. Are you saying it complies or doesn't comply with the town or regional plan? That kind of thing, where something is not understood and they want some kind of clarification or supplemental information. But having said that, absent something like that, where there's a missing piece, where something isn't making sense or you need clarification of a party's position, a court or a board deciding on an application decides on what the applicant wants to put in and what the neighbors want to put in. And it would be our job to decide what is relevant and not duplicative of the prior evidence. In other words, if 3 people came and testified and said, this is going to cause an undue adverse impact on X criteria, you don't need 5 other people to come and say the exact same thing at a second hearing before the LURB. So to me, it's about what people want to put in. We should not be dictating that unless there is an infirmity in some information that we're not clear on or understanding of. Follow me? So
Thank you.
And the other thing is that it's important to allow, we think, I think this is the notion that we all hold, is that we don't want to shut people out of this process. We don't want to over formalize the district commission process by, oh gosh, you got to lawyer up because it's no longer anything's allowed in after that on the record, what goes in at the lower level. And that's to benefit not only the neighbors, but also the developer. The developer doesn't necessarily have to hire all the experts necessary if it's not going to be a contested case. And the evidence that they do present without that additional robust information may be good enough to get their permit. And if it is, so be it. They shouldn't be required to expend funds that are unnecessary. And this gives them that opportunity. Okay, let me move on then to some questions that I jotted down just to make sure. The A&R appeals we already are going to talk about. I wanted to revisit what Sarah had brought up a couple meetings ago about the municipal petition standing and wanted to get a weather report from the board. Do you want us to pursue eliminating petition standing, or do we let it alone and not make any recommendation?
I don't. Sorry.
Yeah, you will recall that it was a topic within one or two of the bills actually last session. So is there an appetite to pursue this at all?
I don't have an appetite to pursue it. I don't think. I think that there was a change from that the legislature already made it a little more robust in terms of the numbers of people that would be required to petition. What about the A&R appeals? Do you want to hear from us on that, Brooke?
No, I said we'll come back to that after our conversation with the secretary.
Okay.
That's on the
Oh,
11th.
I'm sorry. I see.
I skipped that
so-
one.
So that's my feeling on municipal petition. What about others? Alex?
I'd rather not go there. I think it's been asked and answered and at the legislature, and I don't think us making a recommendation is gonna move that hill of beans. So I think we should focus elsewhere.
Kirsten, Sarah, do you have thoughts? Sarah?
I know Vermont League of Cities and Towns feels pretty strongly about this. This is not a hill I'm willing to die on. I think what we've said in conversation, as we've discussed within our municipal backgrounds, I saw one once in my tenure of over 20 years. It's not a frequent occurrence. And again, the state has already tightened this up. But I just know that there are those out there that feel strongly that this could be tightened up further. But again, I think with everything else that we have to get to, I'm not sure that this has a level of importance right now.
All right, so Sarah's not willing to die on that hill of beans. How about you, Kirsten?
I'm gonna fire at Alex today. I don't have a real strong opinion on this. I'm not as familiar with the legislative history either, but what everyone's saying makes sense. So I'm good with that.
All right, Brooke, there you go.
Let's move on.
Okay.
Great. Okay, now this is the meat of what I wanted to really get to today with you folks. All right, so what are the roles that we're talking about embracing here? And as we were discussing, having this supplemental review allows us to create the permitting decision. It's not a they were right, they were wrong kind of decision. And so the written decisions, which need to be supported by the APA format of the analysis of the factual findings, then they must support the conclusions of law. Now, we will either have a hearing or on like JOs or on the record reviews, we would have an oral argument if it's requested. And then we set about creating that document. Now, in terms of our legal support, what I'm trying to figure out are roles and how we then determine, do we need lawyers to help write some of those if there's a legal aspect to it or a challenge? And then of course we need administrative support, whether we call the person a clerk, the person who's handling the actual documents, but also lastly, we need perhaps a case manager for the administrative meeting with the parties, setting schedules, that kind of thing. Non-dispositive, non-substantive decision-making, more procedural. So, what do you guys think? Who can do what? What is your preference? And how do you see it working?
Brooke, can you explain how oral argument would work if it's not part of a hearing?
Well, it's held like a hearing, but there's no introduction of new evidence. So if we were having an appeal of a JO, which is on the record, the parties have the ability to ask for an oral argument, and they get to write a brief and say, hey, we're right, you're wrong because this, and this. And they can also ask for an oral argument where we would convene as a board and give each side sort of like the Supreme Court does on appeals. Okay, you get 10 minutes, you get 10 minutes. And We can interrupt and ask questions, focus on this, explain about that, tell me what your argument is here or there. And the other thing that we're also allowing is site visits, because often that's really critical for even an appellate body to understand the context of the appeal. So those are in an on the record, you're just giving them written and oral arguments. That's what they get to do. And then we make
Okay.
our decision. Now, as opposed to if we are getting a hearing on supplemental evidence, because they want to now bring in, we're going to have a battle of the experts on sound, RSG versus Les Bumberg, that we would listen to them at actual hearing. We may have the report ahead of time, but parties get to cross-examine the witnesses, and we could ask questions as well. So we have that smaller evidentiary hearing on supplemental evidence, close the hearing, make findings of fact, conclusions of law, like a district commission would, but based on what was on the record as well as what we heard in addition to that.
So in the case where we're doing something on the record with oral argument, we wouldn't necessarily then need a hearing officer to do what you have in the second bullet point. Is that correct?
No, there's still normally would be a scheduling conference up front.
Okay.
And, so a hearing officer who, at the environmental division, I have seen judges do it. We used to have a case manager who did it for a number of years, who was a lawyer or a clerk at the court. And it was just about setting schedules. But I think what happened was sometimes substantive issues would creep in. And so I think they went back to the judge just handling those, because then it can be more comprehensive if something comes up. So if you were either having a full board listening to a case, either appoint one of the board members as the hearing officer, or, and that one person could have the status conferences with the parties. Here's the schedule. It's an automatic thing. You have any problem with that and you want to ask for a relief from the normal schedule? Okay, explain why. And then, the schedule would get posted, that kind of thing. Now, beyond that, there might be, for our lawyers, actual legal challenges, legal motions. We can't shut down everything. And we might need them to address a legal motion because we need some research done on Westlaw, and then for them to help us to provide the legal opinion. So we know that there is a role for the lawyer, but do we use the lawyer as a hearing officer, or shall we, one person on the board be appointed on each case to handle the administrative moving of the case along schedule-wise?
Alex?
Look, I'm inclined to say that I would like an attorney on our team to serve in that function as a hearing officer. My question is, if that were to happen, would that compromise that same attorney's ability to assist the board in writing the final decision once it was elevated to the board level for review?
No, because that lawyer would be on the same team helping the board again, and they would be an arm of the board for the administrative aspects of the case. So there's no changing of teams or even a firewall issue, for example, versus like the district commission below or anything. The lawyer is going to help the board, be a hearing officer. They can help write the decision if we want them to, whatever we need them to do attached to that case.
So in my mind, Brooke, I see two staff people dedicated to this appellate function, a clerk and an attorney. And the clerk handles all of the administrative stuff, and the attorney handles advising the board, drafting decisions, and if we need a hearing officer serving in that role.
I agree with Alex on this. Kirsten, Sarah, what do you think? Kirsten?
I think that all sounds fine. I guess just to note that I think the hearing officer handling those kinds of matters could also be a board member. And it would be fantastic if we had a board member who, had a legal background and then this isn't about us as individual board members presently, just in general. Like if there was a board member or more than one board member who themselves were attorneys, had that background, that would be great to have that board member be a hearing officer. But these roles that Brooke has outlined make sense to me.
Sarah.
Keep in mind, let me
Oh,
just insert, and
yeah.
keep in mind that we also do need the ability to respond at a hearing to evidentiary objections. And that needs to be a lawyer deciding that. So the other option, I don't mean to interrupt too much, but the other option is to create flexibility because we're not sure of what the volume will be. So retain the ability to appoint a member of the board to act as hearing officer, as well as typically utilizing our legal staff. I mean, just to build in some flexibility, perhaps. Just a thought. Sarah? Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's all right. I like what you just said. I think that it sort of balances both because I absolutely agree with Alex and Janet in terms of we need to have legally trained people doing this, at least to start. I think this is something that, to Kirsten's point, you'd be excellent at, and maybe the rest of us could come up to speed as we get a higher caseload and we adapt. But I think to start, if the idea is that we are going to do this to make sure that we're efficient as well as accurate, I think that having legal staff would be beneficial.
And let me add, my preference is to use legal staff for two reasons. One is, the board member acting in that capacity, they would not be on equal footing with the rest of the board, I think. And I would, for the three of us to have a decision to make, I mean, the five of us to have a decision to make, I think that board member, or any of our board members, if they were lawyers, it's helpful, but having that lawyer in charge of those decisions, like on motions and stuff, I think is a better model to utilize, because the other thing is that board member would be making independent decisions about it. And, just because there's a lawyer on the board doesn't necessarily mean that they have the background to be able to, fulfill that role. So while flexibility may not be a bad thing, my really strong preference is to have legal do it.
Well, and I think as far as our recommendations in this report, we're not going to outline every single detail of how this system will work, because the legislature has to authorize it, and then we're going to have to build it. So I think I agree with you, Brooke, about the way it ought to work. But I think what's maybe most important is saying, what is the minimum requisite staffing we need to make it work, whatever version we end up implementing. And let's make sure in our recommendations to the legislature, we make it really clear, like, if you want us to do this, we can't do it unless we have this many additional staff. And if they say, well, what if a board member is the hearing officer? So we're like, well, maybe, but we feel strongly that, like, this appellate function can only work with this many, staff. And here's the type of staff we're thinking of.
Yeah,
And Alex, I think that's a good argument for not suggesting that. I mean, yeah, maybe the flexibility is good to have, Brooke, but maybe we shouldn't suggest it at this point.
Yeah. No, I totally follow you, for sure. The other thing is that I know this sounds like, micro minutia here, but this is really important to understand what role, how many people we do need. can we get by with one lawyer? I'm not sure. Jenny and I really have to put our thinking caps on. And this is the kind of minutia that is going to drive that. Gee, Jenny, I need a lawyer on every single appeal that comes up. Can you do that with one more lawyer? I don't know about that. So it's, I know it sounds like we're getting into too much of the weeds, but it's really important to try, based on whatever data we do have, to predict that capacity as accurately as we can. Administrative support, I think we're good with one clerk/tech person. If anyone has other thoughts in that regard, Kirsten?
I just had another question about the hearing officer role
Oh, sure.
before we talk about admin support, if that's
Mhm.
okay.
Sure.
So I'm looking at the concept of narrowing appeal issues as something that could be handled by a hearing officer. And I'm just wondering, under this model, is there any sort of opportunity for checks and balances, at that the board could have if a party, for example, doesn't agree with how that hearing officer decision has occurred? More typically, are they just like board designee, that's it, that's a final decision, it's sort of like the board's decision by that appointed hearing officer?
What type of decision are you talking about? Like, I'm not gonna let your evidence in because that kind of thing?
Yeah, or there's a whole like array of statement of questions, and then the hearing officer says, sort of like refines it and organizes it into a certain narrower scope of questions and issues, but then the parties to the appeal don't really agree with the hearing officer's decision about that. Can the parties still bring that item to the board for, I guess, reconsideration?
Well, part of it depends on how you're structuring this. If we're at a hearing and our hearing officer says, no, you can't put that evidence in, that's a determination. I don't think it matters whether it's a hearing officer or us. An appeal from any determination during the appellate process can be appealed to the higher authority, which would be the Supreme Court. And they, normally, if you don't like the decision at the end, you appeal it and say, well, here are the 5 things that they did wrong. The hearing officer did this and that was wrong. They didn't let my evidence in, blah, blah, blah. The other way to appeal is if an issue comes up that you can demonstrate is dispositive of the case or so important that it must be appealed now because there would be a big waste of judicial and other resources of the parties to go through the whole case without getting a determination on this. That is called an interlocutory appeal. It's before the final case is done and ready for appeal rights to the next tribunal. You can ask for that. We're building that into these rules as well because it is available under the APA. But those are the non-final decisions. Can we go up before the case is over and get this issue nailed down? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's those 2 different avenues, but we're not building into, and I don't know that I've ever seen a hearing officer being able, appealing that to like the fuller board. Unless you're in a PUC kind of situation where they're not making the real decision, the hearing officer is just recommending a decision. If you follow that.
Yeah.
So, and, right now, I'm not necessarily contemplating putting a hearing officer in charge of an actual case or decision. We could later if we find that the capacity needs to be expanded. But right now, I think what we are trying to look at are the simple cases. We'll go with that 3-member panel. And then we have the full board on the bigger cases. So I'm not really sure that they're going to be substantive decisions made by a hearing officer that need to be appealed. So.
Thanks.
Yeah. So administrative support, I'm thinking one person, but I got to talk some more with Rachel when she gets back. We were trying to get a sense of, what the universes were to try to figure out how many cases, how many documents. The actual capacity in the computer system is not the big issue. It's a person handling each document and organizing it. So that's kind of I think it's more confined if we don't bleed out into any other job for the administrative support person, if we're going to rely on our lawyers for the hearing officer functions. And to move the case through scheduling wise and procedurally, I think we're good with one administrative support person. And then my last question was about what we talked about right up front was tier 1, whether it was just housing or tier 1. So I think we will go forward with all of tier 1. I think it's a good bright line. We can also make a note that it could just be housing, but everyone's all right. We'll propose it as tier 1A all and tier 1B housing. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, unless there are any other questions, I'm done 5 minutes early.
I was just gonna say 5 minutes early, Brooke.
Gee, Alex, you got 5 extra minutes.
Well, Brooke, you skipped number 4 on the share, what's being shared on screen right now.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I did skip the ombuds office. Oh, no. Okay. Anyone have any thoughts on that? It's sort of been a little bit sidelined in terms of any kind of conversations with other programs.
I think it's a little bit of a separate recommendation that we could have that goes with, some of the other legislative input that we might provide. I mean, do you feel that it's an integral part of what we would put forth for appeals at this point, Brooke?
My true feelings about the matter are Act 250 is we have the district coordinators who are able to help all comers. It's become a burden on us. I think it's one of those things, gee, this would be really nice if it could be reinstituted and wouldn't it comply with EJ? But I think it is just, put it at the end as a recommendation. The other thing is that, the environmental division has pro se litigation course once a month for people who are going to be pro se litigants. So there are some other things that are available. Would I love to see an EJ office? Of course I would, but I think right now it's not demonstrably going to speed things up in terms of appeals. And that is really the importance of this study. So I agree, we can mention it, give it some ink and let the legislature decide, because it's a big ask for a lot of money if you're going to do it across programs.
Brooke, did you just say that the environmental court has a monthly pro se training?
Yes, they do.
Very interesting. I wonder if that's something we should note for people on our website, but Sarah?
I was just gonna say, I think this is one of those overarching issues that's been raised on a variety of things that we've touched. And I think it's worth noting. I'm not sure, to Jan's point, that this is something that we need to necessarily address here, but I was actually struck by it. I was just trying to find the reference in researching tier 1A. It still is in Title 24 in the 4,000 range, saying that municipalities, it had to do with V-Trans permitting and municipalities having to put people on notice that V-Trans permits were required. And there still is language in there saying, contact your permit specialist.
Yeah.
It was so embedded. And so I don't know if this, if it goes to the legislature first as, a legislative fix that's recommended, or if it's something more substantive there.
Kirsten, Alex, thoughts on that?
Well, just as a quick reminder, the wood products manufacturing report did include a recommendation that we would, continue to advocate for an ombudsperson to support, all comers in the sector. And it was understood at the time that this had come up as a, kind of like a resource gap in the appeals study. So I see the value of having that role available for different, sort of regulatory and appeal avenues. In an ideal world, I also think if it's a role that's trying to do, all things, it can become so diluted as to lose effectiveness. So, I agree with mentioning it in the report as something that would be, worthwhile resource.
Mhm.
But understand, the not insignificant cost.
Yeah. Alex, do you have a thought to add?
I agree. It's worth mentioning. I would appreciate it if someone could reach out to either ANR or someone in the governor's administration to get their feedback on this before it lands in our report once and for all, because there was a decision made to get rid of the permit specialist. It wasn't, I don't think it was done willy-nilly. And if somebody, at a different part of state organization, has a coherent argument or rationale, I would appreciate hearing it before we even give it, some
Yeah.
ink.
I think that we've heard from Billy Coster at ANR about this, and we could summarize his input on this before deciding on the language that we put in this report. Sarah, your hand's been up.
I was just gonna say, I did find it's in 24 VSA 4448C that the administrative officer, which is the zoning administrator, should inform any person applying for municipal permits or authorizations. The person should contact the regional permit specialist employed by the Agency of Natural Resources. So just throw that out there for a bookmark.
That could go to Pete for a technical fix in the interim. For our
I think
list.
they do have something. Kirsten, what's the name of it? Is it still called a permit specialist? It's not a human you can it's like one or two people for the whole state, and you can call and leave a message and they get back to you or something, but it's not the way it used to be.
Yeah.
I think there is a community assistance specialist.
Yeah,
And
that's what it's called.
Last I checked, which has been some time now, they were still making available project review sheets for discrete project types, which were, I think, limited to linear, like trails, utility lines, that kind of thing, I think.
Right, and I
but
don't
it's-
think that, sorry, go ahead,
But
Kirsten, finish.
it's not being deployed in the way historically the permit specialists had done, as we know.
Right,
Um,
right, and I don't think that we should recommend a fix to the statutory language that directs people to the community, support specialist, because that's something that gets put on every single zoning permit application or zoning permit, So that's a lot of permits going to just two people, directing people to contact people statewide. Yeah, the fix needs to be that the permit specialists were replaced with this online, system.
yeah, the navigator.
Yeah. Permit navigator. Yeah. Okay. Oh, now we're still, wait, now we're
We've
over
lost
3
3
minutes.
minutes.
What happened? We stole
Sorry.
it from Alex.
Thank you, everyone, for your help. I appreciate it.
Before
Right.
we move on to tier 3, are there any other comments on this topic from anybody in attendance? Okay, seeing none. Alex, take it away.
So we started the conversation last week on this topic, which is for table setting, um, getting your feedback on my recommendations for updating the first draft of the tier 3 rules so we could get to a second draft so that we can actually go out and get broad public input from Vermonters and not just from our working group and our staff and our board. My thought was that the first draft was sufficiently problematic that it was it was not ripe to go to the general public. But I would like the second draft to be less problematic. But before I go ahead and make a bunch of changes based on the feedback that I've heard at the 4 board meetings in July, the 2 working group meetings, and our staff meeting, I wanted to give you a set of sort of summary and some recommendations and get your input on those. So I was hoping we could just work through the document from page 1 forward. And I'll take notes and again, I was hoping that you could pay particular attention to the portions where I actually provide a recommendation. There are some that I list just sort of for reference based on our prior conversations that I don't think there's really a decision point on, but there are definitely some where I'm giving you like, here's my recommendation, or here's a couple of options to try to simplify your thinking if that helps. So that's all. Don't know how else to get the conversation flowing than that.
Would it help for anyone to see the memo as we discuss this? Alex's memo? Brooke
Yes.
is nodding. We got
Yes,
some
okay.
nods. Okay.
Okay, it was part of the meeting material for this meeting, so hopefully both the public and board members have had a chance to look at it, but I'm happy to share screen to facilitate this in-meeting discussion.
Thank
Let
you.
me do that. Okay, there it is. Let me know
Great.
if anyone wants it zoomed in or out.
I think it looks good to me.
So page 1 is just a bit of preamble on the memo, but the bottom of page 1 gets into this, the first substantive section, which is pretty substantive. It's which resource areas to include or exclude, based on the 6 that the legislature told us we had to consider, as well as the another 10 or more that the working group had talked through.
I'm pretty much in agreement with what you've written on all of these. Are there board members who are not at this point and would like to discuss Alex's recommendations further? Brooke. Go ahead.
There's a lot that I think we need to discuss, and
Yeah.
I don't really know where to start. I mean, could we just go through them like one by one, maybe?
Sure.
Sure. So on the first page, the first 3 resource areas listed are the resource areas that were in the first draft, all of which needed refinements, and those are discussed below in the mapping section. But those first 3, headwater stream areas, significant natural communities, and habitat connectors as they're defined, are all in the first draft and proposed to still be in the second draft with some refinements. The 4th one that's listed there on page 1 is river corridors. And this is one that was not in the first draft, and there was discussion about whether it should be. And so, yeah, any thoughts on river corridors and whether they should be included or excluded? My recommendation is to exclude them and rely on ANR's upcoming river corridor specific permitting process.
I can respond to river corridors.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So not that I have any qualms about A&R being the the primary permitting authority, but I am concerned in terms of their ability to resource these issues and what the time frame is for the expected ability to actually regulate them. That's my only concern with anything that is being suggested to be taken over by A&R. Whether it's flood hazard areas, well, great, but what year is that going to happen is really my concern, because if we have, towns that don't even have zoning and have no flood regs whatsoever, how do we protect the health and safety of people in those communities if nobody is regulating the fact of development that could go into those areas?
They're
Wonder
great
if
questions, Brooke.
I wonder if we can include flood hazard areas in municipalities that do not have flood hazard regulations.
Well, can we focus the conversation though, one thing at a time? We're
Yeah,
on
actually, we were talking about river corridors,
Yeah,
so
let's
yes.
let's finish river corridors first. It's definitely related to flood hazard areas, but to answer your question, Brooke, my understanding is that under Act 121 of 2024, ANR is on the hook to put to create this river corridor permitting process by 2028. And I think some of our ANR partners are on the call here, so they can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And I think my recommendation to exclude it is that it's a legislative mandate that it happen. And B, to your very good question about, well, but yeah, when, is it's in a reasonable time horizon, and 2028 is, I believe. Our rules wouldn't go into effect until 2027, so it's about a 1-year lag potentially. And maybe more importantly, I do not see this as the only time this board will be doing tier 3 rule conversations and updating. I see this as our first whack at tier 3, and probably in 2 years after 2026, in 2028 or 9, we'll be looking at it again. And if you believe that to be true, like I do, then any lack of progress on the part of a sister agency like ANR, I think, can be remedied at that time. Like, I don't think we need to include the entire universe of potential critical resource areas in this go, especially when we know that there's another program coming. So that's my rationale for, yeah, it's a good point. I agree with you, Brooke, but I think it's okay to take this in steps. Yeah.
Was Sarah's hand? I thought I saw another hand. Maybe not.
I did raise my hand, but Alex very eloquently said a lot of what I was thinking. And I think just to add to that is, I think the road to hell is paved with best intentions. And I could see us all winding up there very quickly, because I think if we try to create a process at the same time ANR is, it could be seen as duplicative or redundant. I think partnering and establishing a lot of the relationships that we have had in the past, where this is really a technical thing to be applied by ANR, that we look to include perhaps in the future once it's more fully baked. I think that perhaps serves the public the best versus us trying to create our own thing in parallel with ANR.
Kirsten, do you have thoughts on the river corridor inclusion or not?
I am more concerned with the flood hazard areas, and I think that we have to be mindful of the extent of areas that are captured in tier 3. I think that we should pay attention to what ANR, does with its upcoming regulations, and but I'm okay with omitting river corridors, at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Be great to just move right along to flood hazard areas because I know they're connected and people have differing opinions on that one.
Yeah, because although ANR is working on something in that respect too, the legislative mandate isn't for them to replace municipal level review with a statewide permit, correct? So I'm good with recommending that happen. But until then, I wonder if we could pick up those flood hazard areas in municipalities that do not have flood hazard regulations. Sarah.
I feel strongly the answer is no, and my reasoning behind it is, if you have, flood damage within a community and you're having to rebuild on a floodplain, this could then add a sort of an insult to injury where it triggers an Act 250 permit. And I worry about statewide resilience. We are seeing more frequent flooding events. I worry that this would be an undue burden on us as well as the public, although it's well intentioned.
Kirsten, what do you think?
I guess I worry, or not worry, but I think that we need more information about flood hazard areas in particular with respect to housing development. And if you look at the interim exemptions, I think there are some types of housing projects that can occur potentially in some flood hazard areas. And I think we should, I guess I would like more information about this before I would sign off on flood hazard areas not otherwise regulated through municipal bylaws or by ANR. And Billy's here, maybe he wants to jump in, but
Let me hear from Brooke first before.
Want to hear from,
I just
think
want
we
to hear
should-
your
I think we
feelings
should
on flood.
I think we should cover them. There's nothing, I think Thomas Weiss's emails were important in highlighting this is about health and safety, and the other things are not necessarily as closely connected. But let's hear from Billy because I do think it's really important, and if we need to pick up the slack or fill the gaps, we probably should.
So
I would just,
before
ahead,
Billy,
please.
sorry, I just want to go back to what Kirsten was saying. There are infill areas where housing could be developed in flood hazards. Those infill areas would have to meet flood proofing standards. And by infill, we worked on this a little bit earlier in our tenure. Those are areas that are already significantly developed. So it would include redevelopment of those areas. But given that, we have municipalities, we have communities like Montpelier where we can't anticipate picking those places up and moving them, into an upland whole cloth. I think if we are seeing redevelopment in ways that meet floodproofing standards and maybe meet better, more modern standards for stormwater infiltration and whatnot, that it's worth continuing to allow that. Sarah?
Actually, Thomas, and then I would put my hand back up. So Thomas and
Okay.
myself.
So let's go to Billy first and then Thomas, if that's okay.
I don't really
Fine.
have much to offer other than to suggest, the analysis of what sort of development is appropriate in special flood hazard areas is fairly complicated technical analysis. I don't know that the LURB or the district commissions have that expertise. I don't know that my agency is going to be able to participate at a meaningful level if you try to permit everything in a floodplain across Vermont, outside of our regulatory framework. So I think this raises a tremendous amount of questions that you need more information on, that I would need to go back to our technical programs and confer with. That I'm sure you'd want to hear from municipalities as to whether they want Act 250 regulating these resources. So this is a major issue that I think you would need to hear from way more stakeholders from before putting it into a final recommendation.
Thank you, Billy. Thomas.
I've got 3 points, I think it is. First is that news reports recently, the town and village of Johnson are making plans to move many of their downtown community facilities up to Johnson State College out of the floodplain. So there are places where it is possible. Secondly, in Montpelier during 2023, or 5 years after the 2011 floods, the federal government built a flood wall in front of the post office. And the 2023 flood overtopped that flood wall by 3 inches. So I'll preface this by I'm a hydrologist and I've done a lot of flood studies. The point being that the current regulations are to some extent not sufficient for the changed conditions that we're having. And I believe that the Act 250 criteria for floodplains or flood hazard areas are sufficient to the FEMA regulations and the zoning regulations, at least in Montpelier. The third point goes back to the question of the board taking over the, I think it was flood regulation in communities that don't have flood regulations. There are some communities that never joined the flood insurance program as a way to basically keep people from developing in the floodplain because they couldn't get flood insurance. So I think it's not a good idea for the board to take on that response. Well, I don't know. I won't say that one. I haven't thought that one through carefully. So those are my 3 points. And as you know from my letters, I support including all of the flood hazard areas and river corridors, not necessarily the 50 or 100-foot river corridors on the smaller streams, but the larger ones that are definitely mapped as Tier 3 areas.
Thank you, Thomas. And I guess one thing to point out is that the Land Use Review Board and the Act 250 program wouldn't necessarily be implementing flood hazard regulations. They would be triggering an Act 250 review, but it wouldn't add flood hazard standards to our criteria. Our criteria would be the same. And so in the same manner that we look at flood hazard areas currently in our reviews, we would just be picking up more permits in flood hazard areas. Is that Sarah?
Yep. So
Go ahead.
I just wanted to, I pulled up Act 121, and it has it starts like on page 5 or 6, under required rulemaking that has to occur before July 1st, 2027. There's a requirement to set forth requirements necessary to ensure that development exempt from municipal regulation in flood hazard areas is regulated by the state. in order to comply with regulatory obligations set forth in the National Flood Insurance Program. So the Act 121 is going to be handling some of this. I think to the other point that was raised, that you just stated, Janet, which is, so you'd be going through Act 250 without flood hazard regulations to necessarily be able to affect projects in a positive way and hold them to some sort of standard where the development within the flood hazard area would be better. And if you would, let's say that you are rebuilding, you are flood proofing, you're elevating a structure as part of response to a flood. Now all of a sudden you're under Act 250 and oops, you have to pay prime ag mitigation and do a phase 2 archaeological study before you can rebuild. I just worry, I think what Billy had said is I think this is a major shift that should be very thoughtfully considered and widely discussed before we were to endeavor down this road. And Thomas has his hands up. Again.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you. Thomas Weiss again. There's a definition of the development or whatever the phrase was that's not regulated by municipalities and floodplains. And that is limited to, there's a definition in the statute somewhere, I'm not remembering where it is, that state buildings are not allowed to be regulated by municipalities, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 in terms of floodplains. And there are 3 or 4 other categories that are quite limited as to what's not able to be developed. And I don't know if what Sarah had looked up gave a reference to the statute number as to what's not covered.
Do the definitions, but I'm not going to have that right now.
I don't think it's in the definitions. That might be in the definitions, but anyway, it's something to be considered. It's not, there are very specific things that can't be regulated under the floodplain bylaws by municipalities. And it's probably in chapter 117 as to what's allowed in or out of bylaws. But it might be in Title 10 somewhere.
Probably 117 if it is limiting what the municipality can do.
Yeah, and
Brooke?
my understanding is that there are those exempt uses, and for those exempt uses that municipalities cannot regulate, there is a state flood hazard review program that reviews those uses. Billy, ever tell me if I'm wrong about this?
Yes, there's the state flood hazard and river corridor rule, and we currently issue permits under that program for those exempt uses. It's like energy projects, municipal projects, agriculture, etc.
Right. So with that in mind, it's not as if we don't have a current mechanism to address projects that are exempt from municipal review, which is where most flood hazard regulation happens. So it seems like there's the ability to leverage that. And yeah, if there's a desire to make sure that flood hazard regulation is actually happening for a public health and safety, standpoint, then maybe there are recommendations that we can make in our Tier 3 report that call on the legislature to give A&R the resources to expand the programs that right now only cover exempt uses in communities, for example, that aren't participating in the National Flood Insurance Program, to speak to Brooke's concern, rather than having the Act 250 program through the Tier 3 designation be the stopgap when we don't promulgate our own flood hazard regulations. We don't have our own flood regulation program. When projects are reviewed under our flooding criteria in Act 250, all we do is point at A&R and ask them for their feedback on the project and take their advice. So I think there's potential alternatives to sweeping it all in to our program under Tier 3.
Kirsten?
So in terms of the recommendations, Alex, has this been like either A or B? Has that been vetted with ANR? Like and I don't want to put Billy on the spot here, but I mean, I'm just looking to ensure that any gaps in terms of making sure that we're not continuing to place development in flood-prone areas unless it's correctly flood-proofed, et cetera. I completely agree. This is very technical. But I'm just wondering that, we would conceptually be saying either that we recommend that there's assurance that that ANR has permitting jurisdiction in municipalities that don't have regs, or that there be a new statewide ANR permit process. And what does ANR have to say about that?
So, so just to back up a little bit, as Alex was explaining, we have an existing floodplain and river corridor permitting authority for municipally exempt purposes. The Flood Safety Act expanded our regulatory oversight for all development in river corridors. It did not do that for floodplains. What it did was it required the agency to develop a minimum floodplain standards for municipalities that do regulate it. As part of that legislative debate, there was some discussion as to whether ANR should permit all development in floodplains. And the consensus was now is not the time for that. I think the municipalities felt very strongly that they did not want the state regulating those areas. We're open to that. As we discussed, I think that would be a natural expansion of the expansion that occurred through the Flood Safety Act to not only have us permit in floodplains, not only in river corridors, but in floodplains. But it's a massive effort. So yeah, it would need to come with more resources, et cetera. But I think that the biggest issue is that the municipalities were pretty strongly opposed to it. And this was a question that the legislature considered squarely when they acted on the Flood Safety Act. So there's a recent history of kind of this debate playing out at the State House.
Thank you, Billy. Brooke?
Billy, was there any indication as to why so many towns were against it?
I don't know, local control. People like to
Yes.
make their own decisions
Yes.
around where growth should happen in their communities, generally.
Brooke, I
Yeah,
think it's
local
really
control.
important to understand that the Flood Safety Act did change the game in terms of compelling municipalities at a certain date to meet the minimum standard that Billy mentioned. ANR is now responsible for writing, right? So ANR is not going to administer flood hazard permits in municipalities, but they are going to set the bar, and municipalities are going to have to meet that bar. Josh Hanford is our Vermont League of Cities and Towns representative on the Tier 3 group. And when this question came up in our working group meetings, it was Josh that said that we're moving towards a more state dictated flood hazard standard. And he was the one who said there are going to be a lot of municipalities that would actually appreciate the state taking over this permit responsibility, because many municipalities don't have the resources and are, to be perfectly honest, frustrated by how frequently flood hazard regulations change the minimum standards by the National Flood Insurance Program. So I think if ANR is potentially willing, but only with the right undertaking and the right resources, that prior conversation of municipalities saying, no, we really want this, I think that may also change. And I'm saying that as a former municipal official who has, helped with lots of flood hazard regulation projects. It's no small task for municipal development review boards to do that work. And as many of you know, municipalities are required to notify ANR when those applications go through, and to acknowledge the input from ANR in their process of rendering a decision. So there's already state involvement. So making it one step further, I think, is kind of logical. But
there is a mandate that it go to the regional floodplain manager at ANR. And
Yeah.
the regional floodplain manager, however, looks at the local regulations and just sort of restates them and tells the DRB that's what, that's what you need. I mean, I'm not sure that the current setup, at least as I experienced it in Manchester,
I
really
think
adds
what's
that
gonna
much expertise for the DRB to make a decision. Go ahead, Billy.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I do think with the advent of a minimum floodplain standard statewide, that will create a better baseline standard for that process to rely on. And then DEC will be able to give much more guidance to municipalities to how to comply with that standard, because it will be the same everywhere. They won't have to cater it to the specific bylaws in a particular community. So I agree with you. The current process is flawed. I do think the minimum floodplain standard will improve that process. And then once that's in place, if people determine this should really just be a statewide permit program, like that's certainly a conversation we're open to having. I just feel like there are these kind of steps that are already underway as a result of the Flood Safety Act that would benefit from playing out before we kind of tinker with this further.
And I think that, as Alex says, there are municipalities that are frustrated by how confusing and how difficult it is, given their resources, to implement flood hazard regulations. But there are still many who, local control is paramount, and they don't want another statewide permit system to take the place of their own. But, that's something that is just a political, reality. And as you said, Billy, these are steps that we are going through. We may all get to the same place eventually, but we're going through these steps as the legislature directed us. Kirsten, you still have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to sort of say more of the same. I didn't really understand the municipal resistance, because that what you described in terms of the municipal body, there's that coordination piece that happens with the state floodplain coordinator, who provides the technical review to and through the municipality. So ultimately, that's what it takes effect, as I understand the system. So, well, thank you, Billy. I appreciate the update and the thoughts.
Sarah, your hand was up momentarily. Did it mean to go down?
Yeah, I was just going to offer, just to sort of round out the conversation. I think it was focused on a little bit of communities that might not want to do the minimum or technical applying. I will say that there are communities that have gone above and beyond the required minimums, those CRS communities within the state of Vermont that have tried to exceed those minimums and apply as a way of decreasing flood insurance costs within their communities and hopefully getting to a higher level of ERAF. So sort of the yin and the yang, it's not just communities that are trying to do the bare minimum. I think there are also those that are trying to be exceptional. So thank you.
Annette?
Hello. I appreciate the discussion. It's been educational. So in the context of Act 250, which is what we're talking about in Tier 3, I will note that there are 2 cases going on right now involving development in areas that have a strong history of flooding. Some of you are probably aware of them. One is in Linden, involving and it is an Act 250, and it involves a site that I understand has flooded a lot. There was a motel there, got torn down, and now somebody wants to put a gas station there. And because it's an Act 250, ANR is participating. The other one is in Manchester, where it's not an Act 250 because it is a priority housing project. And while the person from ANR came in and presented his recommendations, he made a point of saying we have no role to play unless it's an Act 250. And I
Well,
was,
they
that's what
still
he said.
do for the municipal level.
Well, he made his recommendation, but he said, we don't, as opposed to what's happening in Linden, where they are actively participating.
Yes.
He said, we don't have any role to play in the municipal part of it. I've found this all to be very confusing. I did just dig up a presentation I made to a legislative committee 3 years ago, where I took the maps. This was involving the need for putting money into wastewater treatment facilities. And I looked at downtowns and turned on the layers to show all the areas of some downtowns that were in flood hazard areas. And I guess what surprised me about this whole topic is that we aren't finding ways to just say no. We shouldn't build in these places that flood repeatedly over and over and over, and those should be the targets of buyouts. So in the context, getting back to the whether or not it should be in tier 3, I understand now better, thanks to the explanations you've had about what is happening. I didn't realize that there is some things happening about floodplains, and I thought it was only the river corridor. But I'm still concerned that as a state, we're looking for ways to enable development in areas that flood. And having seen these 2 different cases, one of which involves Act 250 and one of which doesn't, I see that Act 250 is a much better vehicle for having this conversation, whereas on the municipal level, as has been pointed out, it's really not something that people on DRBs are able to do much with, especially when you don't have A&R coming in. Now, Billy did say they don't have the capacity to deal with all this, which says to me that there's a problem with too much proposed development in floodplains, if that's true. So I'm troubled that people are being put in harm's way. I've lived in towns that have flooded, and the trauma that people go through is very real. And so when you have areas that repeatedly flood, like downtown Montpelier, I appreciate what they're doing in Johnson. So this is a complicated topic and part of a much larger discussion. But I think overall we need to find ways to stop development in areas that repeatedly have a history of flooding. And whether or not that comes into tier 3, I mean, that exemption, the interim exemption that enables priority housing to be put in flood hazard areas, I think needs to be something on your list to take to the legislature to say that all areas that are going to get these interim exemptions should not allow for flood hazard areas to apply. And this was something that Jean from the Land Opportunity and Access Board supported in our discussion, Alex, if you remember, that they're concerned about the low-income housing being put specifically in the areas that flood. So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Annette. So you feel like you got any direction there, Alex?
Sort of. I feel like I'd like to move on though, because we're running out of
Yeah.
time and
We
we're
are.
only on page 2 of 6.
Yeah.
So could
Yeah.
we talk about riparian areas?
Yes.
Great. So it's one of the 6 required resource areas, or rather one of the 6 resource areas we are required to consider. And again, from the start, both flood hazard areas and riparian areas were high on my list for potential tier 3 consideration. And I do think, as I say in the memo, that riparian areas are important for multiple reasons. Flood control is only one. And I do think that they deserve state oversight. I think that, we've brought that to wetlands, we've brought that to shorelands. We should have brought that to riparian areas some time ago, but we haven't yet. But with that said, again, my recommendation is not to include it in tier 3, to exclude it from tier 3 at this time. Because I think it, just like the wetland program and the shoreline program, it's a resource that would be much better served by a tailored statewide program and not not forced into the Act 250 review program through inclusion in tier 3. But this is what I'm interested to hear from all of you, if you agree. A little bit of just quick reminder, our charge is to come up with tier 3 rules. Our charge is also to report to the legislature once we file those rules with the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, LCAR, on why we created the rules, proposed the rules that we did, and what recommendations we have. And so you're seeing quite a few recommendations from me where I'm saying exclude from tier 3, but make a strong recommendation in the follow-up report that resource be addressed in this alternative way. And riparian areas is one of those.
Right, and your recommendation is to protect them via an expanded river corridor regulatory framework. Correct.
That's what Billy recommended during our working group conversations as one possibility. And yeah, I said alternatively, it could be an entirely new statewide riparian buffer, permit program, which understood would require resources and money.
Mhm.
And so it's no small lift on anyone's part, especially A&Rs. But yeah, one of those two options as opposed to tier 3 at this time.
Right, and that also because of the extent of them, it goes counter to the intent of tier 3 to be limited. Is that
Yeah,
part of your argument?
That's a little bit part of it. I will
Okay.
acknowledge that if you read Act 181, there's no words that say that. There's no words that say this is meant to be a limited area. But that's been my understanding of the intent and our conversations from when we were first took this up. But I think if you look at riparian buffers anywhere in the state, we have so many map streams that the impact of them on existing development and properties that have development nearby but not in but close, it's remarkable. There's a lot going on there, which would mean that the reach of inclusion of this as tier 3, I think, would be immense. Yeah, and Act 250 as a comprehensive review protocol just to me doesn't seem like the right mechanism as opposed to something specific to the resource itself.
Mhm. So can I hear from each board member? Brooke? Oh, Billy, do you want to preface?
Yeah, I
the board
apologize. I
member
have
comments?
I apologize. I have to leave for another meeting right now. So I did want to just flag, as Alex suggested, Act 181 did amend the statute to include in the river corridor regulation the opportunity to include requirements for maintenance of native riparian vegetation. So I believe that is kind of a latent potential of the existing river corridor permitting program. So thank you. Apologies, I have to go.
Okay, thanks. So Brooke, thoughts on riparian areas?
Yeah, I mean, if it's going along with river corridors, I'm good.
Kirsten?
Yeah, I see it as just too voluminous, and if I'm okay with it being otherwise addressed. And I do also think, yeah, I'm okay with having the resource specific protection if that can be attained. Like, I think in the sort of like a bigger context of adding up what will comprise tier 3, for me, this wouldn't be in.
Okay. Sarah?
I agree with Alex.
Okay. Good. Let's do Class A watersheds quickly before moving on to maybe since we're Alex, would it set you back to just do Class A watersheds and then take this up again at our next meeting? Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. Yes, it would set me back, but I think we don't have any other choice because we ran out of time today. So best we can do is just table it and then take it up at the next meeting.
I think we could add another 20 minutes maybe. Because I think the personnel matters are not going to take as much time as we maybe anticipated. So do you want to give it another 20?
Oh, sure. I'll take
Okay,
whatever
let's
time
do
you're
that.
willing to give.
Let's do that. So let's deal with Class A watersheds. Again, I
Yeah.
agree with Alex on this, so, but go ahead, Alex, make your argument.
I don't want to make it too strongly because this is one where it's frustrating that the reason, as I understand it from talking with ANR folks, that Class A waters have not advanced, that there aren't more of them designated because it requires an application process and a designation, and municipalities apparently are the ones making those applications to a large degree. And apparently the reason there aren't more of them is because there are triggers in statute that limit some very logical wastewater treatment options within Class A watersheds. And that we have technology today that ensures through our water wastewater permitting that these kinds of wastewater systems will not pollute a watershed, but they're still under statute prohibited in Class A watershed area. So it's frustrating that we have this limited amount of them when ANR feels there could be many more, but there isn't a desire to see them designated until that statutory glitch is fixed.
So it's a
and
statutory glitch,
that's my understanding. Yes.
not a rules glitch?
Not a rules glitch. No, it's a
Oh.
statutory glitch. And
Huh.
the reason it's frustrating is because ANR's point, it has been to me that if Class A watersheds become a Tier 3 resource, the disincentive for municipalities to designate additional ones for areas that really should be designated as Class A waters because they're pristine areas will just be added to the disincentive. So my recommendation, I'm a little conflicted about it, but my recommendation is to, follow ANR's recommendation and exclude them from Tier 3 for now. And recommend that ANR complete the anti-degradation rulemaking process, which not everyone feels is going to solve the problem, but work with the legislature on the statutory glitch as well. So yeah, that's sort of where I stand. But I understand folks' frustration that these are our most pristine waters and watershed areas. Why wouldn't we put development in those areas through additional scrutiny? Interested what other people have to say to the extent you understand it.
So let's hear from Sarah.
I agree with Alex.
Okay,
Sorry,
how
I'm
about
gonna try and keep
Kirsten?
it short.
Okay, yeah, Kirsten.
Well, I just wonder if there's any logic to sort of leveraging this topic with ANR. I mean, or with stakeholders to this stale legislation. That we perhaps wouldn't include these important watershed areas, providing, the following occurs. I don't want to make this overly complex, but it strikes me as a little, unfortunate and odd that Vermont is sort of in this situation with these waters. So, and I need to go back to the mapping to get my head around how big of an area does this, do these Class A watersheds, what are we talking about? And I wanted to ask you too, Alex, you had said you would try to find a little time to talk to us a little bit about wildlife crossings, and in terms of the how much land cover area we're talking about sort of statewide for 800 versus 2,000 feet, or maybe Tier 3 as a whole in terms of how it's currently envisioned. I know as we're playing with, well, what's in and out, of course, that will change, but I don't know if you have any of that information. Sorry, I'm kind of mixing and matching two things here.
Nope, that's okay. So to your first question with regard to the Class A waters, in ANR's draft analysis back in April, they did provide information about the extent of those
The
areas.
extent of it.
So that's on the Tier 3 web page, but I'm looking at it right now. That's why I
Understand.
stopped to share so I could look at the document. And they say that currently Class A waters include 320,000 watershed acres, 637 lake acres, and 809 river miles. So that's the current state of Class A waters. DEC has identified potential Class A candidates that include another 164,000 watershed acres, over 7,000 additional lake acres, and over 500 additional river miles. So,
So we're talking about over 500,000 acres.
Yes. Yes. Some of it designated now, some of it having the potential to be designated, all of which is shown on the Tier 3 map viewer if you were to look at it. So it's not an insignificant amount of acreage, but remember, Vermont on an acreage basis is about 6 million acres. So 500,000 or so out of 6 million is still a pretty small drop in the bucket. But that's the general sort of land area that we're talking about in terms of Class A watershed acres, somewhere in the 300 to 500,000 range, depending on what's formally designated and what's potential. Yeah, and I'm happy to. I did do some quick numbers on the habitat connector area and how much land area that covers. But let's talk about that when we get to that part of the memo. Right now, this Class A waters is the part that I'm curious what others feel about inclusion or not. Recommending ANR finalize the rules, the legislature fix the glitch, and maybe we reconsider it in 2 or 3 years if they haven't.
Brooke, we hear from you on Class A watersheds.
I am not familiar with the municipal designation of Class A waters, and I find that remarkable. That it's up to a town whether or not something exists. That's an important resource. So that bothers me. And this notion that, oh, gee, now they're not going to designate them Class A because they won't want it covered by Act 250. That really rubs me the wrong way. I don't understand. I mean, I get local control, but we're talking about an important area. So I kind of fall back to my concerns that I have about, flood hazard regs. I get everything that was talked about there. Anti-degradation rule, I don't think it accomplishes what needs to be accomplished, but I don't know what else to do. I think my big question is this a big problem now? Are people actually trying to develop in these areas? I assume much of it is like steep slopes so I understand everything. If anti-degradation is the best that it gets at this point, and we don't want to prevent people from classifying this as Class A, okay, maybe the Act 250 is not the place to address it. So I'll go along with Alex's recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the anti-degradation rulemaking process, the finalization of the rules, but also I'd like to understand this legislative glitch that you're talking about, Alex. It seems unlikely to me that the statute addresses particular types of septic systems.
But it does.
It does?
I'm happy to
Find
send
that
it to you
so
because that
incredible.
was my question to
Okay.
ANR, and they provided a nice summary. I don't
Okay.
know that I've sent that summary to all of you. I think I may have
No.
only sent it to Brooke or Kirsten,
Yeah, I
who
don't
was
think I
asking
saw it.
about it. So I can send
Okay.
it along. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll do that.
Okay, so let's move on to your next topic. We have a few minutes still, so scroll, Alex, scroll.
Okay, scrolling. So we're through with the resource areas to be included or excluded. The next section of the memo on page 3 talks about the refinements to make to the mapping. And as indicated in the first section, the 3 resource areas that we had called out as being in the first draft need some significant work. And that work is discussed here. I don't really want to go through every single one. I think we talked about them during our meetings, and this was really just my way of telling you this is where I'm headed with it. So I'm happy to take feedback if you think I'm headed in the wrong direction.
I think these first 3 were pretty clear, but Brooke raised her hand quickly. So Brooke, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this notion about the private landowners who have been made representations about, you know, the significant natural communities being mapped on their property, not being used for regulatory purposes. I don't think that an off-ramp, so long as they're willing to conserve the area or whatever, is good enough. I really have a concern that the state made a representation to these people that we are now not honoring. And I think we should maybe kick it to legal to see, I don't know what it is that was represented to these people. Is it in writing? I think that's a big issue, and I don't want to step into a morass that potentially could even give rise to a bunch of litigation. I really think we need to be careful about this. I don't feel that it's right for us as an arm of the state to go against something that somebody else has promised somebody about mapping. And then to do the very thing they were concerned about, i.e. use it for regulatory purposes. So I feel like an off-ramp to, oh, if you conserve it and don't touch it and agree you're never going to develop it, great. You're not under, you know, tier 3 jurisdiction. I don't think that, I'm not comfortable with it at all.
Yeah, and Brooke, we had talked at the prior meeting about that kind of an off-ramp, and I got the impression that multiple board members thought that might be an interesting solution. But I too, as I thought further about it, began to realize that it doesn't really do anything, right? So the intent of having it in these having a tier 3 designation is to try to encourage property owners to avoid developing in those areas. Design your project in such a way so that you don't have to go through Act 250 because you have successfully avoided impact in the tier 3 areas. And if you can't avoid it and you're in it, well, then, you know, you go through Act 250 and it's the regular review process. But the idea that someone would like be in current use and have a protection, you know, management plan so as not to impact that area, but the only reason that they would be in Act 250 was because they were impacting that area, because tier 3, you know, jurisdiction is impact based. It just seems circular to me. So I'm with you that the opt out for protecting it on your own doesn't really make sense to me. And then it just becomes the question that you raised, I think, well, your question and the one that I explained in the memo about whether to include uncommon natural communities that are ranked S3, of which we don't really have the full universe of knowledge about. But yeah, I think your point is a good one. It's just weird, right? Because what you're saying is if we made representations, we being the state, about how the information would be used, then in perpetuity, the state's doing this with regard to important ecological information. And that also feels weird. That these could be our most significant and rarest natural communities. And we're just going to say, well, never mind.
Kirsten.
I'm okay with you on the S3 thing, though. I agree with you on S1 and 2.
Yeah.
Well, I just wonder if we could get more information about the representations that occurred and then probably get some legal guidance on this.
I'm happy to reach out to Fish and Wildlife and get more. Yep, I can do that. And certainly
Does that
talk
make
to
sense?
legal.
Like,
Yeah. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I think the idea for more information is good.
Okay. Great. Can we do one more? Point, habitat connectors here?
Sure.
It's a
So
big one.
again, many of these refinements, I think, are not really up for debate. They're just sort of, mapping irregularities that need to be fixed. Some of them are substantive, like B and C on page 4 talk about including more road segments, not just the ones that connect the highest priority connectivity blocks, but also the ones that connect highest priority blocks to just priority blocks. So that will expand the universe of habitat connectors. There would be more of them shown on the map. And under C, this would go beyond what Fish and Wildlife recommended in terms of their road-based habitat connector identification. This would be saying, hey, if there's a regional plan or another statewide conservation agency that has identified a critical habitat connector, that we add it, that we reflect it in this habitat connector tier 3 area. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I recognize that it is an expansion to what, the limited level of analysis that Fish and Wildlife was recommending specific to roads. The one that is sort of the big one is letter E on page 4. And that is what distance do we apply for this road-based habitat connector algorithm or rubric that Vermont Fish and Wildlife recommended? And they didn't have a recommendation, and I just wanted to show both ends of the spectrum because it's very much tied to the road rule. So the idea is habitat connectors are not just across roads. They're all over the landscape. But the road rule is a broad level of new jurisdiction that will largely cover development in interior forest areas. So we don't need to worry about establishing tier 3 jurisdiction in those areas. And so that's why Fish and Wildlife said, really the areas of the most at-risk areas will be those areas that are not covered by the road rule. And so, as you all know, the road rule has 2 numbers in it, 800 feet and 2,000 feet. So we just showed habitat connectors in this road-based algorithm at those 2 distances. What we put in tier 3 doesn't have to be either of those, but for simplicity, those are the 2 that we showed, and I'm struggling with which one to pick. And so I gave you a couple of options in the memo, and my recommendation was a little unsure, but maybe just go with the more conservative one of 2,000 feet, which is significantly more of a footprint on the landscape. So Kirsten asked me to try to get what the overall land area would be if we use these 2 different numbers. So for a habitat connector with an 800-foot buffer on either side of the road, we're talking about between 120 and 150,000 acres, which is approximately 2.1 to 2.6% of Vermont's land area. So that's if we choose the 800-foot option. At the 2,000-foot buffer option, again on either side of the road, it's a range of 387 to 478,000 acres, which is between 6.6 and 8.1% of Vermont's land area. So to make it really, quick, it could be 2.6% at 800 feet. It could be 8.1% at 2,000 feet. So it's a very substantial difference in how much land area is going to be jurisdictional in those road areas.
Brooks had her hand up on this one. Brooke?
Yeah, I'm having trouble understanding what or how many of these connectors, based on the data you just explained, how many of these have we mapped or are you talking about? Is this a very small number? Because right now we've only mapped a small number, or are these estimates like likely to double, or?
Good
do we
question.
know that?
So the estimates that I just gave you verbally are based on what you see on the map viewer today, the tier 3 map viewer. So it is the entire universe of what was in draft 1 for habitat connectors. But in this memo, I'm proposing that we increase them. So if I scroll up, sorry, don't get dizzy, again, under B and C, there's some expansion of these areas proposed just to include additional road segments. And your question is a good one. I do not think that by doing these B and C expansions that we're going to double or even increase by 50% the land area covered under this habitat connector piece of tier 3. But I don't have the actual number to give you. So I'm not sure, Brooke, sorry. I think the best way to think of it is really an apples to apples with regard to letter E of the memo, like 800 feet, 2,000 feet. This is the land area difference, 2% of the state, 8% of the state, which if that matters to you, and maybe it doesn't because it's hard to conceptualize, 2 to 8% of 6 million acres. But maybe that helps.
And I guess my other question is in terms of the mapping of these without regard to roads. I mean, everything is oriented to roads. So I'm still confused in terms of how other areas are protected that don't necessarily have an existing road on them. Are you relying on the road rule for that?
Correct. That was Vermont Fish and Wildlife's recommendation. They said for those areas that are not adjacent to roads, the road rule is going to create jurisdiction, and we can rely on that so that we can focus our tier 3 conversation on just those areas that are not covered by the road rule.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I have been knocking it around in my head and been a little confused on it. Thanks.
Alex, I wonder about, thinking about what percentage of the state tier 3 might take up as a sort of understanding of tier 3. And I wonder how much of let's go with the 8% that you suggested might be taken up by this. How much of that might coincide with the other 2 areas that we have mapped for tier 3? Is it significant or not?
That's a good question, and I think it's insignificant. I don't think there's
Okay.
much overlap. Yeah,
Okay.
so I think those other 2 areas, headwater stream intersection of data sets and significant natural communities, will be additive to this habitat connector slice. But remember, the significant natural communities, well, hey, based on today's conversation, maybe we're going to kick them out entirely. But even if we included them with S1, S2, they're a tiny
Yeah.
slice of the state. And the
Yeah.
headwater areas are sort of in between.
And so the last thing I'll put out there is maybe there's a number between 800 and 2,000 that might feel appropriate. Kirsten.
I was just going to share that before I heard Alex's land cover information today, in my mind, conceptually, I was thinking, well, the 2,000-foot number makes for a tighter nexus with the road rule and would also, in my mind, support that there could be some exempt activities and, things like ADUs and proximity of existing dwellings, that kind of thing. Whereas if it was a smaller, more discrete resource, really focused more tightly, that you would, you would put the resource at more risk of sort of like degrading its integrity if you allowed for more exempt activities and expansions to occur. So I was sort of in my mind conceptually thinking of the bigger number, but 8%, that's a lot. So I thank you for doing that math and for sharing that today. And I feel like I need to think about this some more.
Okay, I think we should wrap this up for now. I'm sorry, Alex, to put you back. Do you feel like we need to call another board meeting maybe to deal with this so that you don't get behind schedule?
I guess I gotta say, let me think about that.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I'll
We
ponder
can-
that.
We can talk about that on Wednesday at our agenda setting meeting.
Let's
Okay.
do that.
Okay. Okay, so our next item is discussion of appeals, enforcement, and personnel matters. Do I have a motion? Sarah?
For the, let me get to it. The board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals, enforcement actions, personnel and staffing matters, and have confidential attorney-client communications on these matters. I move that we find the premature knowledge of these matters would place the board at substantial disadvantage and the board enter executive session.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. I'll just clarify that we don't need legal advice on the personnel matter, but we do on the other. So, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
That was 5 ayes. So we will enter executive session. We will come back to this meeting before adjourning.
Okay.